so long since I felt your skin. It's been so long since I listened in to one of your shells and the song of your sea. Princess of the ocean, won't you come with me? Take my hand and come with me, darling, down to the shoreline. Take my hand and come with me, darling, down to the
Hello and welcome to the Nature Garden podcast with me, Carl Steinson, and the Weekending Show team from Lionheart Radio. It's a bonny wee wander along nature paths, riverbanks and beaches, through woods and wetlands, parks and gardens, and a chance to hear some great Northumbrian stories. In this episode, we're looking at the beauty of growing your own and the treats of October. Tom Pattinson's waxing lyrical about the benefits of growing a little bit of fruit and veg and how it helps to save the planet. Tom Cadwallender is continuing his autumn diary and tracking the amazing arrivals of birds from all over the world to our coast and fields. And we'll take a trip to one of his favourite bird hides. Plus, some top tips from Tom and some jobs for the week in the garden. All coming up here on the Nature Garden podcast.
come with me, darling, down to the shoreline.
Air miles are something we hear a lot about these days. Well, at least in terms of freight, bearing in mind the coronavirus restrictions on people travelling. Tom Pattinson's been looking at ways to reduce food miles, the distance our food travels to our plates, and, well, ways to save the planet. Over to you, Tom.
I've been thinking a lot about gardening recently, ever since the lockdown way back in March and the continuing restriction on our movements. It's been a lifeline to myself and to millions in this country and abroad. We have evidence of this in the text they send us, contact, listening to the podcasts, etc. And some weeks ago, I ordered some seed, 2 or 3 months ago actually, and the seed firm sent me a response saying, sorry, there will be a delay. Lots of people are ordering vegetable seeds especially, and the weekly rate is hundreds of percent higher than normal, understanding. And then the press follow up with many people are turning towards gardening at these difficult times. No surprise to me, that's the way it's always been, but the more on board the merrier as far as I'm concerned. And those television programmes really aimed at, okay, you're confined to your own premises, here's some things you can try, simple things, and growing a few vegetables, a few simple fruits, strawberries, and you'll find it therapeutic, which it is. Healthy exercise in the garden, a sense of achievement when you're growing something you can actually say, I've created that. It begins with the tiny brown speck of a seed, lifeless seemingly, and then you give it the right conditions and it grows into a seedling, germinates into a young plant, and then it matures. If it's a flower, it will probably give you a beautiful colour and a fragrance. If it's something edible like a fruit or a vegetable, how proud you feel, a sense of achievement when you take it to the kitchen and present it, part of the family meal. Excellent. So many things come from growing plants and being in a garden, the calmness of garden, surrounded by plants. I trained as a gardener, and I've had gardening in my blood throughout my adulthood. Even though sometimes sidetracked with other things, the garden is always there. And you know, you can talk as much as you like about gardening, and talk about the theory of it, but once you get the land in front of you, that's when you have to, for want of a better expression, put your money where your mouth is. You've got to be able to grow the things. And I love doing that. We have a range of fruit. We haven't a massive garden. We could never claim to be self-sufficient in food all the year round. That's very difficult to achieve. But I can make contributions to the weekly diet, the weekly meals, most months in the year, through growing the spring crops, summer crops, autumn, winter crops, some in the greenhouse, some in the garden. And that gives a great sense of achievement. And this, you can save money in this way. If the weekly shopping includes a few fruits, a few vegetables, a few flowers, which it generally does, then you can cut that out in the summer if you grow a few strawberries, say, or you have 1 or 2 fruit bushes. And if you have any excess, put them in the freezer, and you can go to those in the winter, when fruit prices generally rise anyway, because there's air miles involved in bringing them here, and you've got them in the freezer, fresh as the day they were put there. So there's a great deal to be thought about there. If you grow your own vegetables, say, and I do have vegetable beds, if you grow them and you take it to the kitchen, you know there are no pesticides. No pesticides have been involved in the growing because you don't use them. And there's no plastic packaging being used in presenting them for sale. They keep promising to get rid of plastic packaging, but I still see it on vegetables and fruit. Best of all, no air miles involved. Very few. If you're thinking of going from the vegetable bed to the kitchen, these are serious things, and you get a great kick out of growing them and putting them on the table when this has been the case. You save money, and you get a great sense of achievement when you grow some of your own.
I met up with Tom Cadwallender from the British Trust for Ornithology by chance the other week here on Holy Island, and we had a chat and a cuppa while scores of birders scoured the trees for the elusive dusky warbler. Tom was excited then, and he's still lapping up the delights that October brings in terms of bird life. Here's Tom with the latest notes in his autumn diary.
You may have noticed over the last 10 days or so there's been a sharp increase in the number of blackbirds that we're seeing in our gardens, in our woods and parks and so forth. And these blackbirds are part of a great sort of annual movement of tens of thousands of birds which come across from Northern Europe and Scandinavian points north from there every year to spend their winter here. So these blackbirds are going to be sort of everywhere. You'll hear them chucking on and around the place. And the other species that will be involved, the other thrush species, will be, there's field fares. And field fares are kind of like our missel thrushes, really. They're about sort of 7 inches tall, but they're quite grey on the back end, but they've got this kind of lovely, creamy buff wash on their undersides and in their under wings. And they've got these spotty flanks as well. And they hop around. And you'll see them in quite big numbers, and they like to feed on apples and so forth. But you'll see them in fields, actually, funny enough, and that's kind of guess where the name comes from, and it's field fare. It's named after that. But also we're seeing good numbers of redwings coming in, and redwings are like song thrushes. They're about sort of 6 inches tall, but unlike song thrushes, they've got this great sucking eye stripe, which kind of gives them away. But as the name suggests, they have red on them, and it's their underwing. So the sides of their breasts and underwing is kind of this orangey red colour, really quite distinctive. And they love feeding on the berries, the hawthorn berries that we see in our hedgerows. Loads of those, and these birds are going to be coming across in their tens of thousands, and the first ones are just making their way in, and it's just incredible. That's one of the exciting things about being on the coast. in Northumberland is the fact that we see this migration, this annual movement of birds into the UK. And these birds will kind of gradually, as the autumn progresses, they'll make their way west and southwest through the UK, getting down into Cornwall perhaps, or even if the winter cuts in a bit poorly, they will get into northern France and into Iberia. But as the kind of the winter progresses and we get into sort of late winter, they will make their way back and onto the east coast, ready for their return journey back to their breeding grounds. But also in amongst these thrush species, we get things like chaffinches. Hard to imagine that our garden chaffinch, actually those numbers will be supplemented by these continental birds. Then they come across in quite big numbers, and there's some interesting work being carried out in the last few years, identifying populations by their local accents, and the experts can actually identify Scandinavian chaffinches by the way they call, as opposed to the UK birds. But they'll be crossing quite big numbers, and a very similar species to the chaffinch that comes over is the brambling. Brambling is, as I've suggested, is very similar to chaffinch, but it has this yellowy bill and this nice lemon yellow sort of underwing, and they're really quite distinctive. They've also got little spotty sides, and they're about 5 inches tall. So they are quite distinctive, and they come across in quite big numbers, and they love to be around beech mast. If you've got a few beech trees and they're starting to drop their fruits, if you like, their beech mast, there's a good chance you'll get some bramblings around them, and you just have to be careful and just look out there. You'll see little white rumps as they're sort of scooting around the undergrowth and on the floor and looking for ripe beech mast. Great stuff. But bramblings and chaffinches are coming in good numbers as well. And believe it or not, species which we are very used to seeing in our gardens during the course of the summers, species like dunnock, that little grey and brown stripy one with a pointed bill that scoots around in amongst the feeders and undergrowth in your garden. They're quite promiscuous actually, but that's a story for another day. But even those birds are supplemented by continental birds coming in from Scandinavia, and it's a marvelous thing. And the other species we'll see sort of emptying out of the northern lands as the weather cuts in are species like wren, goldcrest, of course. We've talked about those in the past. Imagine wrens crossing over, so they're not necessarily they're going to be sort of British bred birds, these ones, but also we see robins. And quite incredibly, we see robins coming in, and the continental robins are quite hard to separate from the UK birds because you've got to get your eye in a little bit. But they have this sort of more greyish sort of markings around their head and sort of shoulders, and the red on their breast is a slightly different shade. The experts can tell them apart, but some of us are kind of struggling. But there we are. But anyway, they're going to be coming in quite big numbers. But a species you may not think of as a migrant is the wood pigeon. You think there's thousands of them in this country anyway, but they have been recorded crossing the North Sea in vast numbers, which is quite staggering. And yes, so wood pigeons are migrants as well. They're coming in to spend the winter here. Incredible, absolutely incredible. But when you think of the journeys these birds make, it's just awe-inspiring, really. Absolutely awe-inspiring. Those birds will travel across the North Sea in kind of in favourable conditions, and it's in their genes, and they'll do it every year. But yes, there's a lot to see out there. There's get out into the woods, get out into the fields, get out into the hedgerows and see what you can see. It's just absolutely marvellous. I love this time that we're transitioning time from autumn into winter. It's absolutely brilliant.
Money's tight for many folks at the moment. We invest a lot in our gardens, money and time and sweat. But there are clever ways to make something for next year for free from what we already have. It's the gardener's dividend, and Tom Pattinson's here to share some ideas we can all profit from.
Whether you've just taken up gardening as a hobby or been gardening all of your life, one thing for sure: you want to save money where possible. You might be on a limited budget, aren't we all? So you look to propagation, because that is a big way of saving money. Propagating, raising your own plants. But of course, first you need the plants to raise from. Friends will have cuttings at this time of year, maybe some runners of strawberries, or maybe some stem cuttings of shrubs in their garden. And you might have something to exchange with them. If you are buying a plant, always look for a perennial if possible. By perennials I mean the herbaceous perennial, which you can propagate in various ways, from seed, from stem cuttings, from dividing up the plant. Other perennials, fruit bush, like blackcurrant, red currant, gooseberry, or shrubs. All of these perennials will lend themselves in some way to propagation. They last for years, which means you're going to have an ongoing amount of fresh material rooted from them. Division is the quickest way and simplest way to propagate. Take the herbaceous perennial, coneflower, Rudbeckia goldstem. It's dying down now. It has a root system which is ticking over throughout the winter and shoots ready to come next year. If it's formed a big clump in the garden, dig it up. Don't go for the centre because that's where they age quickest, herbaceous perennials. Go for the vigorous parts on the outside, divide it up with a spade, and you've got young plants immediately with roots and potential shoots ready to go. Simple way of propagating. Another way is layering. A shrub outside, the Viburnum bodinentense dawn, some of its branches touch the ground and it roots itself, just layering the tip, forming roots. This also happens to the winter jasmine with its beautiful yellow flowers. The roots, the stems, sprawl across the soil, and some that touch the soil and stay there become buried slightly. They root, forming a new plant. If they're not doing so, put a weight on them to weigh them down, make sure they do root. The cultivated bramble, blackberry, Loch Ness I have in the garden, huge fruits on it, no spines or thorns on the stems. I just weigh the tip of one of those down with a brick and it roots. Stem cuttings, another simple way of increasing your stock of plants. At the moment, I'm cutting or pruning one or two shrubs, autumn time, and one of those is Weigela Florida variegata, which has super spring flowers, pink spring flowers, about the size of a 10-penny piece, and layered over the branches, and of course that variegated foliage. It's a deciduous plant. It's going to lose those beautiful leaves shortly, but we'll get more next year. But it needs chopping back. It grows far too tall each year. So I'm going to prune it by about a third of its height, back by a third. And I will not waste the pruning stems that are cut away. Those make superb hardwood cuttings. Cut them about 20 to 30 centimetres long. That's between almost a foot long, no longer, and plant them upright in the garden, leaving just about the top third of them showing above soil level, and leave them there. No facilities required, just leave them to root themselves in the garden. You can do this several shrubs, the budlegia and others, and you can do it with softwood fruit bushes like gooseberry, red currant, black currant, to increase your stock. Simple. Also, there's a saving of seeds. If you're going to save seeds, I generally save them from the garden. The peas, early onward pea. It's an old favourite. It keeps on producing true to form each year because it's come from a line which has been continued saving seed from the same plant each time. That doesn't always work. It works with species plants. Say if you had one of the Berberis darwinii, which is a species plant, not a cultivar or variety, it's a species, then they reproduce true from seed if you save the seed of those in the garden. If I have a runner bean, which is not a F1 hybrid, then it will come more or less true to form. In this way, I'm saving money. Don't try to save an F1 hybrid or something that's an F1 hybrid, say flower, because that's the first generation of that plant, and they tell you in the catalogue exactly what it's going to flower like. But the second generation, if it sets seed for you and if you save them, they'll be a mixture of the parents. Finally, round up some young plants at the moment. I call it my sheepdog operation. I go around looking for plants that have seeded themselves, or birds have spread the seed and have germinated in the garden this time of year. And one of my favourites is the foxglove. I get them, they're all scattered round. I round them up into a group where they'll flower next year.
Now, a new little mini-series. As I said, I was chatting to Tom the other week about good places to see birds, places where you can sit and just lap up the quiet. And I asked him if he could tell us a bit more about some of the spots he goes to, so here's Tom checking in from one of his favourite bird hides.
Lindisfarne National Nature Reserve is just a wonderfully magical place for a birdwatcher in winter time. It's brilliant. There's thousands of waders, wildfowl and geese just spending their time here. And I'm in a hide at Ellick, which is at the southern end of Fenham Flats. Fenham Flats is just one wonderful place. It's estuarine mud, and it's just jam-packed with biomass. There's just so much food in there, whether it's invertebrate food or vegetation. There's just so much in there. And that's what attracts these birds to this area. I'm sitting in a little wooden box, well, it's a hide, at Ellick, and this hide is dug into the embankment, which is right on the edge of the mudflats. And the embankment is to protect the local farmland from flooding. So we're hunkered down on this edge here. And we're waiting for the tide to push these birds closer to us. We've got barnacle geese, we've got brent geese, widgeon, teal, curlew, grey plover, redshanks. Oh, it's just full of birds. It's brilliant. But from this vantage point, it's not just the birds. It's kind of, we've got Lindisfarne Castle just sitting high on its perch to the north of us, and just in front of Lindisfarne we've got the pinnacles, the navigation pinnacles of Rossbach Sands, just standing there all glorious in the sunshine, in the afternoon sunshine. But we're now sort of just waiting on, biding our time, waiting for the tide to bring these birds closer before they lift and go into the fields to spend through the high tide, before they can get back and start feeding again. They're going to be here right through the majority of the winter, these birds. And we've got barnacles and brent geese coming from a very similar place. It's Svalbard. You wouldn't believe it, but these birds nest on high cliffs. And when the young are ready to fledge, they will tumble down these high, really quite precarious sort of cliffs, and actually gather themselves at the bottom and fly off on their migration when they're ready. But the brents and the barnacle geese are both black geese, and they're not very tall either. They're not the biggest of the geese, and brent geese are probably about half a time size again of a mallard, but they're almost all dark. But the birds that we have here are from this specific population of light-bellied brent geese. And there's another different race, it's the dark-bellies as well, which winter on the west coast and on the south coast. So we're quite privileged here at Lindisfarne to have this quite discrete population here for the winter. But anyway, they're as the name suggests, they're light-bellies, but their backs are very, very dark, and their heads are all dark as well. But they have this little flash of white on their neck, which makes them stand out. And the barnacle geese are very closely related to the brents, and they're all dark as well, apart from their bellies, but they've got this white face and makes them stand out. And interestingly, the barnacle geese generally used to follow the coastline of the east coast here, from Scotland down through Northumberland to the Tyne Gap, and cross over and spend all their winter on the Solway. But there's this population, this group of about 800 to 1,000, which have learned to spend their winter here at Lindisfarne in the last sort of 10 years or so, and it's quite something. And they've really changed their behaviour. And I'm just now waiting for these birds to come up and fly over us. But these two geese are what makes this area special, in combination with the pinkfeet, which are grey geese. And these birds are coming down from Greenland and Iceland to spend their winter here. But there's big numbers of them. And as the name suggests, they've got pink legs, but they're all grey otherwise. But they've got really quite short bills compared to the greylags, which have got quite big orange beaks. And the pinkfeet have got little kind of dark beaks with pink tip to them. But they're quite something. But the widgeon are here as well. Widgeon are species of ducks. The males have got pale shields above their bills, and the males have got this white flash in their wing when they fly, and they're quite distinctive. There's about 40,000 birds will come here in winter every year, and they'll spend the first half of the winter here, and then around Christmas time they'll clear off and go down to the Wirral on the west coast. And towards the end of the winter, though, they'll gradually make their way back and spend a few more weeks here before they'll head north, back into northern Europe, into Siberia, where they'll have their breeding season. And what a migration that is. Quite stupendous, really, when you think about it. The rigours these birds have got to go through, it's tremendous. You know, you can never be sort of short of awe when you think about these birds and how they travel. That's absolutely fabulous. But if you listen closely, you can hear some geese coming over. And this is absolutely typical. These are the pinkfeet going over, and there's groups of barnacle geese flying to my right. They're coming over. They're flying just a little bit to the south. Then they're going to go drop into the fields. I don't think you can make out the noise they're making. It's wonderful. The wind is picking up a little bit, and I can actually feel the hide rocking with the wind. It's quite reassuring in its own way. But the tide is just gradually sort of making its way up, and it's getting closer and closer. And these birds are just sort of congregating in front of us. They're becoming quite condensed, and they're packed in quite big numbers, and they're going to be lifting any time soon. In fact, quite a lot have gone now. I don't know if you can hear some of the honking noise they make. And they all make different noises. They're all kind of quite distinctive in their noises. It's kind of a good way of identifying them. Oh, there's a big movement now. They're coming over our heads. I don't know if you can hear the noise they're making. These are the barnacle geese coming over. Oh man, it's fantastic. I love it here. I just love it. Oh, can you hear them? They're getting closer. These geese are just to my right. Oh, they're swirling round. Oh, they really are. They're wonderful. Can you hear them? Oh, just fantastic.
Well, I think it's time to pop over to Tom Pattinson for some jobs for the week or so in the garden.
Okay, Carl, here are the jobs I'll be busy with this week, and the greenhouse is top of the list. There's a fine balance with greenhouses if you have growing crops in there. As we get into autumn, go deeper into it, a lot of moisture around, so there's no watering whatsoever in there. There's enough water in the air, moisture, and it needs a flow of air going through regularly because there are molds and mildews, and we have bunches of grapes, lots of bunches of grapes left. The white one, Madeleine Angevin, dangling, and the black Hamburg. One or two are developing a bit of bit of mould on them, so I have to watch that, snip them off immediately. But the majority of them, it's about eating what you can and enjoying and giving some of them away. They need a close watch at the moment, every single day, twice daily if possible. Also in there, I have a lovely group of Streptocarpus, my collection. Certainly no watering for those. Some of the blooms are still flowering. Beautiful plant with those almost a trumpet with open edge blooms on them. Range of colours. I propagate them from leaf cuttings, and there are some leaf cuttings in there in a propagator, no heat at all, and I've got to get some of them moved into the into the conservatory to save them over winter. So I need to take them out shortly. Now there are quite a lot of potted plants in this Streptocarpus collection. So what I do, as we reach this stage, I select one of each variety. We've got about 20 different cultivars there, 20 varieties, different colours. I take one of each and get those into the conservatory, and that's where they stay over winter with moderate to no water at all. They're starting, one or two of them, to get flowers are fading and they're rotting a little bit, so I'm taking them off daily. Soon they'll have to be moved indoors into the house. We've also got in there some positives, potatoes in pots. Using some of them at the moment, they're second cropping potatoes. I'm harvesting those, some in pots, some in fertiliser bags, which are composting bags, which previously had compost in, and one or two in large pots. Some of them are in full growth, good foliage on them. Some of them, the foliage is fading. That's because I planted them in stages. The first were planted in late July, and it takes 10 weeks to get from planting to harvesting. So the foliage is dying naturally. As it starts to do so, I'm chopping that off, and they're okay in the pot for the moment, or bag, until I need them. But those for Christmas are coming along nicely and still growing. I have lettuce in the border, just planted those into the greenhouse border, and I'm watching those, but they're growing away well. It's the salad bowl lettuce and Lola Rossa, the red-leaved one, and they do well. Leaf lettuce, and I keep cutting at them. Haven't started yet, but we'll start cutting soon. Cut and come again basis. They'll keep us going until about March, through to March. Really, really good value for money. And just under £2 for a packet with 1,000, well over 1,000 seeds in. Brilliant value for money. Also got chrysanthemums in there at the moment, and this is stimulating, seeing them, all the buds on them. They're going to flower for Christmas, which is ideal. So in that greenhouse, it's both stimulating, but there's that feeling of melancholy which autumn brings. Outside, I've been taking cuttings, softwood stem cuttings of hardy fuchsias. There are two there in particular, Genii with the pale lime green foliage, and Hawk's Head with those beautiful little pink flowers. Hawk's Head, they're just two of a collection I have. They're up to about 2 meters tall at the moment, believe it or not. And when I come to prune them, when they're finished flowering, there's a lot of flowering left in them. I prune them right down to almost soil level, and they grow like heroes next spring again. Tough as old boots, really hardy fuchsias. I'm taking stem cuttings of those at the moment, softwood, going into just gritty sand, that's all, and no heat at all in that cold greenhouse. I'm looking at the strawberries. There are runners there of strawberries rooted. I'll have to get those out. There are some self-sown freebies in the garden, foxgloves and little shrubs where birds have been eating the berberis fruits and leaving the seeds behind, and they're coming up. So there's a bit of a harvest of freebies in terms of self-sown plants in the garden. I've got to sort those out. I'm saving some tomatoes for seed, opening them up and letting them dry off, spreading them out, and then getting the seeds out of there and putting those in a cool, dry place. And I'm also enjoying the leaf changes. Beautiful. Viburnum, the red leaves, just before it loses its leaves, the Viburnum bonlantense dawn, and the Forsythia with its yellow leaves at the moment. Must take time to enjoy those leaf changes. And of course, you must enjoy your gardening.
You've been listening to Gardener Tom Pattinson and birder Tom Cadwallender from the British Trust for Ornithology. I'm Carl Steinson, and do check out our Twitter and Facebook page, The Nature Garden, and our website, The Nature Garden Notebook. That's The Nature Garden Notebook, all one word, .com. And we'll be back in 2 weeks' time. In the meantime, enjoy your garden and nature. Bye for now.